Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour. Today, our guest is Alyssa Morales, and you are about to meet a very special human being. Someone that she's doing it, you guys. She's doing it like the depth and intensity and preciousness with which she has healed using the journey of yoga and the transformational aspects of yoga. It's very, very touching. I felt emotional several times while talking to her. I still feel a little bit emotional. And I just want to hold her and send her all the sweetness and the goodness in the world from all of us, our hearts to hers. The fact that she was able to heal herself and is now giving that playbook to others through her yoga therapy practice is just amazing. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about an eating disorder that she had from age 12 to 23. So I just want to warn people, if that's a topic that is challenging for you, you can listen to the podcast, while you're walking in the woods, in the bathtub, curled up in your bed, somewhere where you have that nourishment and support, and maybe have a support person to reach out to in case you need somebody to talk to about it. So let's go meet Alyssa. Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour. I'm Amy Wheeler, your host. Are you needing to earn some continuing education units? Well, we have the exact thing for you. Every single Monday night, we have a Monday night clinic where we practice postures, breathing, and meditation towards a very specific theme of the month. And then we stay afterwards and we talk about the theory of why we chose what we did for that particular practice. We give you a completion certificate, which you can turn into your continuing education body. And we're growing all the time. We have a wonderful community. You can do this live with us online, or you can do it through a recording. Go to www.theoptimalstate.com and check out the Monday Night Clinic, and we would love to see you there. Good morning, Alyssa.
Amy, thanks so much for having me.
Nice to see you today. Where are you joining us from?
I am calling in from Rochester, New York.
Wonderful, wonderful. We had a little snafu on timing due to my fault. I apologize for that. And I'm so glad that we can now kind of settle ourselves and use our yoga tools to come back to balance and just really get to know you and your story and how you found yoga and how you've been healing through yoga and maybe Ayurveda. So why don't we just start and learn just a tiny bit about who you are now in this moment? Before we go back, let's just talk about like who you are, what you do all day, every day, what you're passionate about.
Sure, absolutely. So I have my own private practice here in Rochester, New York. It's called State of Liberation Yoga Therapy. So most of the time I'm here with working one-on-one with yoga therapy clients. I'm also a nurse. And most of my clients are they fall into three categories right now. Sometimes it shifts, but orthopedic injuries, mental health, and then working with individuals coming home from being incarcerated. A little mix of everything.
And I'm just curious, do you meet them as a nurse and then they transfer into yoga therapy, or is that not allowed?
That's a great question. So my nursing scope comes into yoga therapy, but most folks find me just for yoga therapy. And then if there's someone who has a condition that requests nursing considerations to be brought in, then I'll use my nursing tools, whether for assessment or support with medication, things like that. So it really depends on what the client is looking for when they find me.
And I'm just so curious. I've never interviewed, well, I may have, but not very often have I interviewed a nurse. Do you have to then like take off your yoga therapy hat and say, I'm stepping into being a nurse now? Or how does that work?
A good question. I would say yes and no. It definitely depends. if we're looking more at the physical layer, then I will tell the client, like, okay, I'm going to ask you maybe some questions that you might have heard from your doctor or may have heard from other professionals in the healthcare setting that you've visited. And then once I gather that data, then I'm going to run it through my yoga therapy brain, and we're going to kind of pool both together to figure out the next step forward from here.
So you're not actually being a nurse. You're just using that as background information to, like you said, kind of then put that data through the yoga therapy lens.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I think a lot of folks come from that perspective as well. So it's a good place to meet people where they're at, and then easy to kind of transition, what they understand is happening through that language and that lens, and then move it into the yoga therapy space. Yeah.
And I think that's so important because as we start looking at licensed healthcare practitioners who want to get some kind of yoga certificate or yoga therapy credential, we have to be very clear that you're not acting under the scope of practice for your LHCP. You
Yes.
have
Yeah.
that knowledge, but you're acting through the paradigm, through the lens of yoga therapy. So I love that. Thanks for helping us get clear on that. That's like something we need to look at. And in fact, I've just been creating all these blogs about referrals back and forth between healthcare providers and yoga
Mhm.
therapists and how to say it. So if anybody's interested, go to www.amywheeler.com. And I have probably 30 blogs up there around this topic. So, all
Fantastic.
right.
It's so needed.
Yeah, isn't it? I just thought, well, nobody's doing it. I guess I'll get started. And if you have
Oh,
questions for me, go there and look and then write me an email and correct me because I'm
thank
still learning.
you. I will check them out because I'm sure I can use them in my practice.
Yeah, and look at the nursing one specifically and tell me if I'm on track.
Yeah, I will for sure.
So let's go back and talk about you and your story. Let's first go with like, how were you suffering before you found yoga? Because we're kind of assuming that maybe yoga helped you through this suffering, but can we start with what was going on with you before you found this practice?
So when I was 12, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder, and it was pretty gnarly. I guess that's the best word to use. And I was kind of in and out of different levels of care until I was about 2023. So the way that looking back in hindsight now that I understand it is lots of beautiful support and access within the Western healthcare system for healing, the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual components. But for whatever reason, whether it was just my karma or something else, I just continued to cycle year after year, struggling with that. And I got to a point where I exhausted everything within the healthcare system. I'm very fortunate where I live. We have all levels of care for eating disorders, ranging from outpatient all the way to residential. But I had kind of gone through that system and washed it out. So when I was 23, I had what my doctors at the time would call my first relapse as an adult. And I heard that phrase, and it really struck home because it sounded as if they had already written off the possibility of healing from an eating disorder. And everyone has a different perspective. Those that experience eating disorders, some believe that full recovery is possible. Others believe that it's something that is more managed, that you just kind of find a way to quiet it while you live your life. And I'm one of those folks that believes that it can be fully eradicated. So when my doctor said that, I look back now and I'm so grateful for it because it fueled a fire of just like, no, I'm done. And at the time, my boyfriend was very into yoga, and he said, well, why don't you try yoga? And I thought I've exhausted everything else. So instead of trying to take classes, I had a connection to a professional who taught within a school that had a very heavy emphasis on personal transformation. And once I was stable enough, I enrolled into their teacher training program, and I've just never looked back.
Wow. I'm kind of in awe right now. And I have to admit, I'm a little scared to ask questions because I don't want to offend you or any of our audience. So if I ask anything that's too personal or that you feel doesn't need to be talked about, you just tell me and we will edit that out and switch directions.
Thank you.
But my curiosity, I mean, this is why I do this podcast because it's so curious to me. Like, what happened when you went to yoga that was different? That, I mean, age 12 to 23 is such a long time. And then to be written off and exhausted, I just got like a chill hearing you say that. You were only 23 years old. So, what happened in the yoga journey that made such a big difference?
I think the first thing was I was definitely ready to receive yoga. I was at the point where I was just like, I will try anything. And at first, I remember like my first day in teacher training, it was exploratory. I think that the biggest word that comes up so much still in the work that I do is we're just exploring. So there's no commitment to anything. There's no, needing to change things that feel like they're kind of solid or in place. What I first learned in yoga was exploring just what's here, starting with what's here and then exploring how you want to shift it if you do. So it was very self-empowering. And instead of being in a model where I felt like I was the patient and my teachers were the doctor, that was kind of the framework that I was operating out of for so many years. I was welcomed into this space where it was like, no, you know what you need to heal. And I'm just going to ask, yoga's going to ask the questions, yoga's going to offer the practices, and you get to find your way. So it was almost as if my way of healing was flipped on its head a little bit, but in a great way of like, oh, I can do this. Like, this is something I can do. I don't have to follow a meal plan or, go and see my doctor and wait for his recommendations before I make my next move. It's playing ground, it's exploration.
I'm curious, did you also have Western allopathic support at the same time, or did you kind of just say, I'm going to go explore for a little bit over here and see what happens?
For a while, I had both. And I honestly, looking back, that was, I think, imperative for where I was in my journey. But it also allowed me to see where yoga filled in the gaps of
Mhm.
that care. And a great example is I had been on psychiatric medication since I was 12. So I'd never come off of them. And about a year and a half into my yoga journey, I was able to come off of all of my medications. I wouldn't have felt empowered enough to ask about that unless I was in yoga and feeling, changes and had mentors and people supporting me in that space alongside my doctors advocating for, yeah, let's give it a try and just see what happens. And the two together allowed me to come off of them, and I haven't taken medication since.
Wow. Whew. And that's not to say everyone would have that experience, but your doctors supported you and said, let's give it a try.
Yes, yeah.
Kind of going back to this point about exploration and self-empowerment, I can only imagine how having a more of a hierarchical relationship where someone's telling you, have this meal plan and go to counseling this many times a week and don't do this, don't do that. Was there like a conscious or unconscious pushback to all of that during the time that you were going through those, 10 plus years? I mean, it's interesting to me. Do you think it was mainly that, the hierarchy and the kind of them telling you what to do versus you getting to explore and decide?
Hmm, that's a beautiful question. I think that definitely played a huge role, especially the time that I was ill was adolescence, which for most folks, you are trying to find your way and figure out, answer the question, who am I? And that was definitely a huge part. And then the other portion to eating disorders that folks find really frustrating, rightly so, is that when someone is struggling, we don't always have a desire to get better. Like the coping skills that we have developed at one point felt safe, felt comforting, quote unquote, worked within our understanding. So it was both of having people tell me you can't trust yourself because the eating disorder is so large. And then a combination of that and then just feeling lost within myself of like, if I let go of what I have, what feels safe right now, I don't know where I'm going to land. And that was a question that doctors could never answer. And I understand now that they didn't answer it because they couldn't. It was for me to find. But those 2 points created a lot of friction and kept me sick for a while.
So, just so our listeners understand what you're saying, I mean, it really is a total change of perception. You're saying that the ways that you were participating in your eating disorder, whether that was limited eating or only you're eating certain foods or whatever your, and I put in air quotes, coping mechanisms were,
Mm.
those felt safe to you. And if they took those away and replaced it with a meal plan or you're going to do this, you felt like the rug had been pulled out. And what was going to happen then? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And I'm so happy you use that word perception my understanding of my journey with an eating disorder has been that it is a disease of perception, that the lens that I had, the perception that I had was just, it was fear based. And now that I have yoga to tack on it, it was, more ego and more fear and just kind of misconstruing reality and what's possible.
So, what did you find when you were doing yoga that gave you that foundation and put that strength underneath you to give it a try to let go of some of those behaviors that were causing suffering, but you didn't know anything else, so you didn't want to let go of those behaviors?
You got it right. Yes. Well, in the beginning, it was at first working with a mentor. Since my journey started in teacher training, I had a mentor who just said, when you get home from work every day, I want you to do 3 yoga postures. And in the beginning, it was the hardest thing to do. My mind was racing. I was anxious. I was still very uncomfortable in my physical body at this point in time. So to slow down and do that practice was tough, but I kept a yoga journal throughout my entire teacher training. And I wrote how I felt before, how I felt during, and how I felt after each practice. And every single time, no matter how upset, how anxious, what was going on before, as long as I did it, I felt better after. And I started to see that thread of I can be in the moment with something really uncomfortable and I can shift my experience. And yoga is helping me to do that.
That is so powerful. Yeah.
Because yoga. Yeah.
So you figured that out that you can shift your state, if you will, state of
Mhm.
mind, state of body. And then what happened? Like, what else? Was that the thing, or were there other things too that you discovered that you could let go of those behaviors and still be okay?
I think from there it was exploration again. It was like, okay, if I can shift my experience through yoga postures, what beliefs or fears that I have within the eating disorder can also be shifted? And does yoga have tools for that? And of course, yoga did. So it was a lot of journaling, understanding the beliefs behind my reactions within stress. Breathing was a really big one. I started to track the different changes that happened. So when I was anxious, there was a certain way that I breathed, there was a certain way that I talked, and there was a certain way that I moved. So the more that I understood my patterns when I was dysregulated, the easier or clearer it was to find the practices within yoga to start to balance that out and come back to a place where I felt centered enough to decide, my next choice. Do I want to keep moving that way? Do I want to keep breathing that way? Do I want to keep thinking that way? And if the answer was no, I would pick which one was most accessible. Like, okay, breathing right now, it's crazy, but I'm moving around like a mad person and I can just sit down. I can sit down and I'm going to keep breathing the way that I'm breathing, but I'm going to sit. I'm going to slow my body. And once my body slowed, I slowed the breath. And once the breath slowed, the thought slowed. And then I was able to make a healthier choice in that moment.
Were your teachers telling you this method, or were you just figuring this out by taking classes and being like, oh, I could try that? Because this is pretty sophisticated.
That's a great question, too. I could say it wasn't my teachers. I would say it was me, but it was truly having the foundation of having been in a supportive environment during my illness that allowed just all of these pieces to land in exactly the right spot. So it was the mental health therapy that I had received, the support and love in every single treatment center that started to let things fall into place where it really felt like it was mine to decide.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. All right, so we have to go back a little bit too. This is me and my curious mind. This is why I said if I'm too much, you just turn me off
No.
like a curiosity machine over here. So at first, it was just do 3 yoga postures, right? And then you decided to write down how you felt before, during, and after. That's what we would call in neuroscience like a bottom up approach, meaning your body was doing something, feeling, sensing. We call it the felt sense. And then through possibly those 3 postures, there were signals or messages sent up towards your brain to say, oh, I'm going to be okay. Did you know about bottom up versus top down? Top down is more cognitive, what we might have in psychotherapy, where your mind tells your body it's going to be okay. But bottom up the yoga postures are shifting your state along with your breath work and your focus to tell your mind it's going to be okay. So, did you understand that at the time?
I had some exposure to it. I think now that I'm doing my own practice, like those are the two ways when I support clients is kind of looking at when someone comes into the door, which approach is going to be better. I think somewhere in there I did, but not within the bottom up or top down framework yet.
Yeah, I think we're all starting to learn all this neuroscience. It's emerging right now. Yeah.
Yes, and it's brilliant. I mean, it works. And what a skill to be able to look at both and find your way to balance from either perspective.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from a lot of psychologists and social workers, mental health care providers, and it may even apply to the care and treatment that you got for over a decade, is that they were relying mainly on top down. And it
Mm,
wasn't until they kept that with the bottom up approach, doing both at the same time, that big shifts started to happen. And we're seeing this in even like gut health. There's psychologists that are specific to digestive disorders like irritable bowel syndrome or
mm,
Crohn's disease. So these psychologists have been working top down, but only recently are they starting to think about the bottom up. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Now I'm getting really great results.
yes. And it's awesome that it's kind of moving in that way, that we're looking at it more cohesively. I think within the specific illness that I was dealing with, movement can be abused for some folks. And in my journey, it was very much so. To find a style of movement that the eating disorder would not latch onto and turn into, another coping skill negatively. It was extremely empowering to know that I could come to the mat and do my practice, and that part of my brain was not leading what was happening in that space.
Why do you think that is? Because you're exactly right. You could just turn into like 2 hours a day of flow yoga and it would probably be just like a run. But what was it about the yoga that you were doing that possibly made it different?
Think it was the intention that I entered the yoga space with, which was that it would be a sacred place for healing. And I knew off the bat, I knew my eating disorder was going to try to, come in and move it and, try to use it for negative purposes. And that was also part of the beginning as well, was really finding ways to settle that part of my mind so that I could step more into, I'm moving through this posture or this practice with a different purpose. Like, yes, it's about my body, but I'm looking for deeper soothing and deeper healing.
So even that was a perception.
Yes, 100%. Yes. Because there were moments when I would get on my mat, and if I was anxious, I would find myself just ripping through poses. And then I would stop and I would ask myself, well, who's here with you on the mat? And if it was the eating disorder, then I would take a moment and think of what I could do to shift that. And sometimes it was pausing the practice, sometimes it was choosing a different posture or softening. And that's kind of where the exploration started to come in, is okay, that part of my mind is a little bit more active right now. What can I do to work with it? And there were some days where I would tell myself, if I couldn't get myself to slow down, it's like, okay, we're going to do a few flows, but then we're going to start to slow it down. And, the nervous system kind of follows. When the body starts to slow, so does the thoughts and the breath. And that was just the way that we played until I was able to separate them completely.
I'm just sitting here. I feel a little emotional. I don't even know you, but I feel emotional because I feel like you're sharing like some really deep intimacy within yourself with us for our benefit. Like for you to get this specific about what was happening in your mind, body, and spirit on the mat during these struggles. I'm grateful, but I don't know if you know what a beautiful offering that is, because we don't expect that from a guest. Sometimes it happens, but more so they stay very surface instead of letting us have that window. And I can only imagine the number of people that will listen to this and think, okay, I'm going to try that. So thank you.
Thank you for creating the space to welcome it. I think these are the moments that were transformative. I think to your point too, that we don't always talk about or leave space for. But these are also the moments that I find working with other folks that make the most difference is when there is that felt sense within yourself and when you can identify making a choice that leads to deeper healing, greater healing.
When you were talking, I was thinking to myself, this is why she's such an amazing yoga therapist for people with orthopedic and mental health and those who have been incarcerated, because you experienced it. You figured it out for yourself, and now you're sharing that process with them. It's an intimacy, even in a heart intimacy with your clients. That's why people come back to a yoga therapist. Exactly that.
You're so right. I was like, well, if I can do this, knowing in my own experience the depth of suffering I experienced, everyone can. And yoga just made so much accessible that for a very long time I believed was not. Like the way that I understood healing before and after yoga is so different and much more open.
Yeah. So you said a few minutes ago that eating disorders are a disease of perception and that yoga helped you shift your perception. Maybe you've already told us, but tell us again, what was the biggest perceptual shift that you had as a result of your practice or this teacher training that made you get it? Was it self-empowerment? I mean, it may be what you've already said, but I just think it's so important to talk about that perceptual piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing truly was knowing that I was capable of healing. And this goes way beyond or outside of eating disorders. If we struggle with something for a really long time, it becomes a part of our identity, at least if it's painful or if it's been around a lot to where we have to live our life with, said thing kind of accompanying us. And when I started yoga, I started noticing that there were like these holes being poked into what I believed was possible for myself, but also who I believed myself to be. And it was feeling those places, something that I'd never felt or experienced before, that propelled me to continue to find, okay, well, where else can I poke holes in this? And what else have I been, believing that isn't true? And sometimes that lesson was really difficult to learn, and other times it was extremely freeing, but it always led to deeper liberation in ways that I just, had never thought about or experienced.
I can just imagine you kind of letting go of these identities, who you thought you were, who you thought you had to be, the images that we all think we have to uphold. Were people around you noticing your shift as you went through this and went through this teacher training and started to heal and started to see yourself as someone new or different? Were like your parents or your friends or your partner? Like, was anybody else noticing what was happening?
Yeah, I think those most close to me, my partner Dominic, I think he's probably the one that saw the most changes and my companion in all of it. And he even, like, there were points where he would say, wow, you don't have an eating disorder anymore. Because we had been together at the start when I was sick, and he had to fill some of those roles. Like, there were moments in our relationship where he was more of like the doctor and I was the patient because he was caring for me in certain ways. And I was able to hear from him and watch how the way that yoga was moving me was also moving and healing him. And the same for my family. Like once the acute phase of getting into eating disorder recovery was, kind of coming to an end and I was finding more stability there, yoga started healing all of the other parts of that illness that I just had never kind of gotten around to, whether that was like in relationship with my parents or my siblings or showing up in different ways for my friends. And that is a huge gratitude piece that I have for yoga, because as much as, an eating disorder impacts the person that suffers, it's a disease of disconnection as well. And yoga allowed me to just be a sister, a daughter, a partner, myself. And that has been very beautiful to be able to step into.
Because are you saying before they had to worry about you and care about you, and that was their primary connection to you, but once you started feeling more empowered and able to care for yourself, like they could actually interact with you on a different level now?
Exactly. Yes. For a long time it was worrying or just hoping that things were going okay. And now I just get to be present with them, like fully and completely.
Probably a more full relationship because there's so many other parts of you to explore for them to you and you to them that have nothing to do with the eating disorder. And now all of that seems like it might become more available to explore together.
Yes, 100%. For a very long time, I mean, it still is in ways, but it was exciting. Oh my gosh, I get to meet my mom again, or I get to meet my dad again, or my sister had a baby during this time, and it was just incredible to meet and love on the people that I love with just me present. Like no eating disorder worries or behaviors or fears cutting our time short or, taking my presence away. It was just being exactly where I was.
I mean, I know nothing about you or your family, but somehow in my mind, I'm just thinking of how precious that must have been, like to you and your sister and the baby, and you're focused on the baby and you're happy for her, and just that sacredness or preciousness of those moments. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I think just once you kind of step into that mindset, that framework, you can't help but notice like the magic that is in every interaction.
That's what I'm excited about is for all of us. Because, by the way, what you're talking about today, I think is the journey for all of us that are suffering. You inserted eating disorders, but each one of us has our thing, whether it's
Yes.
pain or whether it's workaholism or whether it's anger. We all have that thing that's blocking us from that preciousness and that magic in every moment.
Yes, I agree. And that's the beautiful thing about being human is we can label it and have language and each of us have a different expression for the things that we struggle with. But exactly what you said, once it's movable or even moved or slid 2 inches away from maybe where it is now, like what happens underneath is we are all journeying, or I know as Ram Dass likes to say, I use this quote a lot, like we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah. And I'm even thinking of all the suffering that's going on in the world, which cannot be ignored and we can't spiritually bypass. But that can exist at the same time as this. Both can be present.
Mhm.
That's what I think we forget. I think we're all like, oh, doomsday, horrible things are happening. And not to say those aren't very serious and affecting us all very deeply. And we can still have this perception of magic in each moment with the people we care about.
I agree with you there that the both can exist. And I think we need the magic to hold the pain and suffering and also to propel our desire, our curiosity, our exploration out of that pain and suffering as individuals, but also collectively.
Yeah, that's something we could bring to the collective. I'm thinking right now, I've got a little word in my mind like a magic revolution. you know,
Yes. Oh, I love that.
let's
Absolutely.
have a magic revolution and everybody bring your magic.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Uh, so we only have a few more minutes. I wish we had longer, but where are you now? Tell us, you're a nurse, you have a yoga therapy practice. Are there other things you want us to know about you and your offerings in the world, or just things you care about that you want to share before we complete in about 5 minutes?
Most of my stuff is pretty local right now because I graduated about a year and a half ago. So I'm still working on building my practice, but I do get to see clients in person and virtual, which is really nice. So expanding some offerings there.
A website or a LinkedIn that
Oh, I have an Instagram. It's my first name, Alyssa underscore YTSOL. That's the best way to find me.
and tell us about YTSOL. What is that
Oh,
about?
that's a great question. So my practice is called State of Liberation Yoga Therapy, or SOUL for short. And I thought of that name just based on my own journey within eating disorder and healing, of that yoga is really just an invitation into greater liberation and to live in that state.
When I saw the soul, I thought of sun. I thought
Yeah.
that's what it's about. And, it can have that too, but that light, right? That light that we connect to, that light that's inside of us. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the other one that the other kind of piece there was being able to shorten it into soul. And I had the same thought, like, yeah, it is like the sun, and we all just feel better when we're in the sun. It's good warmth.
Thank you, Alyssa, for sharing with us today. And I congratulate you. I just feel very touched by what you've shared today and the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me and for asking the questions and creating space for this.
Mm, Thank you. Thank you, Alyssa, for being with us today and for sharing yourself so deeply and transparently. This is the type of conversation that has potential to help people get on the journey of yoga therapy. And this is why we're doing the podcast this whole year. We're just telling stories because they're potent, and it might be something that you can share this episode with someone that you love and say, hey, would you ever consider having yoga or yoga therapy as a complementary modality to whatever else you're doing out there? I've been working with some researchers on major research projects where in their fields, they've mainly had psychologists working with people with this top down approach, a very cognitive behavioral approach or dialectical behavioral approach, which is fantastic and has healed so many people. And a lot of these researchers and practitioners are now saying, I would like to add some of these bottom up strategies like yoga therapy, to see if we could make even more of a difference. And they're like, let's do research together and figure out if there's an added bonus, bringing the body and letting the body know that it's safe, which then in turn will tell the brain that it's safe, and kind of rewiring or reprogramming all these neural pathways, but also reprogramming our perception. Like Alyssa said, a lot of these things that we're suffering from are a disease of perception. That's not to say they don't have physiological and physical components also. But the thing that sometimes is missing is that we need to have this perceptual shift, which is I'm in charge of me, I'm self empowered, I have room to explore with the support of all sorts of other practitioners, such as Western healthcare. It's not an either or, it's a and more. And it sometimes just opens this little door up to help us get back in the driver's seat of our lives so that we can start to figure out how to change our state, how to feel better more of the time. I always say this when I'd ask my college students who I taught for 25 years, what is yoga doing for you? They had trouble articulating it, but what most of them wrote on the evaluation that I sent them was, I just feel better. I feel good. I don't know why, but I feel better more of the time. And that was enough for me, because that's really what it boils down to, is how do we change our state when we're suffering? What can we do to change our state? What can we do to change our perception? What can we do to change the stories that we tell ourselves? We know through neuroscience that the state precedes the story, meaning once you feel something in your body, your brain makes up a story about what that feeling is. And I'll just give you a quick example. The feeling of anxiety often involves your heart rate going up, heart palpitations. Well, a lot of people, when they do cardiovascular exercise, their heart rate goes up. And then the story is, oh, exercise makes me feel anxious. And we have to learn to decouple the increased heart rate from the story of, oh, this is the feeling of anxiety. When in fact, in that situation of cardiovascular exercise, it may not be anxiety. It may be the physiological response to your body needing more oxygen as your muscles are pumping, sending the signals to your heart, hey, get more oxygen down here. And we can decouple that from, oh, that's the feeling I have when I'm anxious. And we can start to kind of pull those apart a little bit. So that's just one example of our state preceding our story, and how we can start to figure out how to work with our state, work with our story back and forth. So I think what Alyssa talked to us about today was just a beautiful example of that. All right, everyone, it's been my pleasure this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode and have a great week. Happy spring. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour. We are really, really blessed to have you all as listeners. We can feel the energy coming back, the gratitude, and we want you to know how much we appreciate you out there in the audience. Every little bit of goodness that we share with you from our guests goes into your ears, down into your heart. I am hopeful that it radiates out into the world. That is the goal. So thank you for being our dependable and reliable listeners. You have no idea how much we appreciate seeing those downloads every single week. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour. We wish you a wonderful week. We hope that somehow, in a small way, we've contributed to your well-being so that you can go out and share that well-being with others. That's what life is all about, bringing in the goodness through you and then shining it out to the world. We need you more than ever. So let's all get out there, do good, be good, and have a great week.